cut more 18 videos for violence in this country than anywhere else in the world.
Things were much freer 25 years ago as far as the representation of things on the screen were concerned.
I understand the last word, censorship. I don't know if I can answer starting from this word, censorship. It's an horrible word.
A great deal of censorship is done by what is offensive to middle-class taste, middle-class sensibilities.
On last night's show, the battles that rage in the British Film Censors offices for the first 70 years of cinema revolved around politics, religion and sex. Tonight, as we pick up the story in 1971, sexual violence is the problem, with storms on the horizon over Straw Dogs, A Clockwork Orange and Last Tango in Paris. We'll see how a new way of watching movies in the 80s, on the home video machine, and the attendant video nasties scare finally brought statutory censorship of movies to Britain for the very first time in 1984. And we'll look at how anxieties about children and young people imitating screen violence have dominated the headlines in the 90s. In 1971, the British Board of Film Censors passed Ken Russell's The Devils.
I think I thought about The Devils that the higher quality it was, the worse the blasphemy could have been. So, I mean, high quality doesn't excuse blasphemy. Blasphemy is blasphemy, full stop.
The Festival of Light organised a letter-writing campaign attacking the BBFC for passing the film. Each letter was carefully answered by the new chief censor, Stephen Murphy. In an interview, he gave a painful glimpse of what was to come.
You will judge each film on its own individual merits?
On its own individual merits. And I'll be wrong, and it'll be for the public to decide how often I'm wrong, how often I'm right. I can't give the answer to that.
But the real power to decide on whether a film could be shown or not lies with the local authorities who license cinemas. A dozen authorities banned the film, ignoring the X certificate which had been issued by retiring censor John Trevelyan. This drastically undermined the board's status.
I think Trevelyan was leaving a poisoned chalice for his successor, Stephen Murphy. He'd had a long innings. He could see the way things were going. He saw the Hollywood morality code had broken down. He realized that his edict was going to be challenged again and again by particularly the American distributors who had films of escalating violence coming along, and he thought it was time to get out.
Unfortunately, and whether John Trevelyan knew this before he left, it was a question of après-moi la déluge, I don't know. But the fact was that these difficult films like Straw Dogs, Clockwork Orange, Last Tango, and The Devils all came in Stephen Murphy's time.
Stephen Murphy's next major problem was an American feature, which, although filmed in Britain, took full advantage of the newly relaxed censorship laws in the States.
Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs created a furore. It was a story that was supposed to show that violent outsiders in the community could provoke an equally violent counter-response. But actually, again, it seemed to show the filmmakers' abnormal interest in violence, and that aroused a considerable outcry.
I'm going to keep them out of this house.
We felt that basically it was a Western film transferred to Cornwall. In other words, the ranch house being attacked by the Indians, which in this case was were the local people. So on the violence side, we were not particularly bothered, because if you analysed it shot by shot, it was no stronger than many other films, although putting it all together, it did look fairly strong.
And there was also an extremely explicit rape scene in it that, by reason of very inefficient censorship, was converted almost into a scene that suggested buggery. So this created a scandal.
Stephen Murphy had been out to the studios to see it in rough cut, and it in fact had modified that sequence. And we then said, well, this looks like buggery. But Stephen said, no, that was not the intention. And we've always wondered whether his pre-cutting had in fact achieved this effect.
Now, quite a number of the media missed Straw Dogs. The outcry and outrage burst upon them before they were prepared to amplify it. So when Stanley Kubrick's film, A Clockwork Orange, came along in January 1972, I think, they were prepared for it. It was a landmark film in that it marked the change from a permissive society of the 60s to the violent society of the 70s.
We certainly felt that Clockwork Orange, when it was all put together, didn't require cuts. And that was our decision. But of course, once it was released, there were various youths who tried to wear the gear, and I think there was one case where some kids were prosecuted for wearing this gear and attacking people. But it was, again, something that was very blown up by the press.
Almost before the film had opened, people were taking against it. And among the people who took against it, to everyone's surprise and alarm, there was the Home Secretary of the day, Reginald Maudling. He asked for a private screening of the film before it had ever opened publicly. He should have been told to queue up at the box office and buy a ticket, that we have what's called freedom of speech in this country.
This is a Laserdisc version of Clockwork Orange, which would be illegal to buy in Britain. This particular scene, as you can see, is very stylishly done. It's very well choreographed, slow motion camera technique, etc. It thrills cineasts at the time. The music, it plays a very important part of the scene. In fact, this piece of music elongates for about another 10 minutes. It sort of rises off the surface. It's almost like an advertisement for violence. We want to join in.
Clockwork Orange was called in by quite a few local authorities up and down the country who wanted to see it before they decided it should be shown in their area. That's to say, they overrode the certificate that the Censors office had given it. That was extremely alarming to the cinema trade.
This scene here is a very good example of Kubrick's virtuoso handheld camera technique. Because of the cutting, it works so well. The scene is so effective. It's amusing. Alex is playing with this rather pretentious piece of phallic sculpture. Kubrick sort of inviting us to laugh, but at the same time be appalled. So we as an audience don't know quite how to react, and that's what the censor hates. Kubrick decided himself to withdraw the film, so it's probably the most effective banning in the censorship's history in this country.
The film industry fearing that the government was going to bring in statutory censorship, the Tories under Edward Heath saying we must make a show of opposing such films because they present violent and seductive images to the young people of our country, a miners' strike in the offing, with all the social anarchy that might breed, and a very weak and irresolute censor in Stephen Murphy. That's what happened in 1972, and it was convulsive.